July 1966. Akron, Ohio. Sam Snead is 53 years old, and his hands are betraying him in public. He owns more tournament wins than any professional in history, and the sweetest swing the game has ever seen. The PGA Championship has come to Firestone. On day 2, Snead stands over a 2-foot putt and hits it twice in one shuddering stroke. The yips, the oldest curse in golf, eating the greatest swing alive from the hands upward. Before the round is over, Snead does something nobody has ever seen in a major championship. He straddles his line, he faces the hole, he swings the putter between his legs like a man playing croquet in front of 10,000 witnesses. His playing partner, Billy Farrell, can hardly believe what he is watching. The gallery does not know whether to gasp or laugh. Then the putts start dropping. Snead finishes near the top of the leaderboard that week. The next season, putting like a croquet player, he wins a national championship by 9 shots and finishes 10th at the Masters at 54. A desperate old man has beaten the yips in front of the entire golfing world. You are supposed to believe that is the story. It is not. Within 2 years, the men who govern golf will make his cure against the law. That was not the first time they reached into a golfer's hands and took something away. It was not the 10th. The rulers of this game work from an office in New Jersey wearing blazers with crests. For more than a century, they have decided not just how golf is played, but what golf is allowed to become. They once wrote a check for more than $1 million. Not to build something, but to make something disappear. This video is the story of everything golf ever outlawed. The clubs, the balls, even the strokes themselves. It is a body count, more than a century long, and the last name on the list is sitting in your bag right now. It begins with a putter from a factory town. In 1902, an engineer named Arthur Knight of Skeneck-Tawdee, New York, built a putter unlike anything golf had seen. The shaft entered the head in the center, not at the heel. His friend Devereaux Emmett tried it, talked about it, and gave it the name of its hometown. Then Walter Travis picked it up. Travis was an Australian-born American who had not touched a club until the age of 34. They called him the Old Man. He won the United States Amateur 3 times. In 1904, he sailed to Royal St. George's and became the first American ever to win the British Amateur. He holed putt after putt with the center-shafted mallet, and the British press was horrified. In 1910, the Royal and Ancient banned center-shafted, mallet-headed putters entirely. Everyone believed it was revenge. An American had taken their oldest title, and St. Andrews had answered by outlawing his weapon. The truth in the records is stranger. The request that triggered the ruling came from a golf club in New Zealand 6 years after Travis had gone home. In St. Andrews' eyes, the issue was never one man. It was whether golf would remain one game, played with traditional implements everywhere on Earth. But the myth survived, because the myth felt true, and the myth changed golf anyway. For the first time in history, America refused to obey. The United States Golf Association, the USGA, refused to adopt the ban. The two empires of golf had split over a workshop putter. The Royal and Ancient held out for 4 decades, surrendering in 1951. Arthur Knight's putter outlived the committee that outlawed it. Remember that pattern, you will see it again. The second ban was aimed at the future itself. By the early 1920s, American firms had learned to draw steel into seamless, tapered tubes. A steel shaft did not warp in the rain, it did not splinter mid-round, it swung the same in April as it did in August. Hickory, the wood that built the game, could promise none of that. The Royal and Ancient had banned steel back in 1914, calling it an impermissible departure from the traditional form and make of golf clubs. It was not pure stubbornness. To St. Andrews, the clubs were the game, and a game that changed its tools whenever industry called was no longer golf. The USGA saw a different truth, that steel made consistent clubs ordinary players could afford, and legalized it in 1924. That summer, Cyril Walker won the United States Open with a steel-shafted putter in his bag. But Britain held the wall for 5 more years. What finally broke it was not an engineer or a champion, it was a prince. In 1929, the Prince of Wales played St. Andrews carrying steel. The Royal and Ancient could hardly confiscate the clubs of its future king. The ban collapsed within the year. The manufacturers understood something the rule makers never did. Spalding released irons named for Bobby Jones, the finest amateur alive, and painted their steel shafts tan to pass for hickory. Golfers wanted the future. They just wanted it dressed as the past. In 1931, Billy Burke became the first man to win a major championship with steel in every club. This is the one chapter of the war the governing bodies lost outright. Hold on to it. It proves the men in blazers can lose, and that will matter at the end of this story. The third band club was invented by a man who grew cotton. Edward Kerr McLean of Texas had no factory and no famous name. What he had was a problem with bunkers and an idea. He built a sand club with a huge flange sole and a face that curved inward like a spoon. It looked wrong. It worked. Sand had been golf's torture chamber for 2 centuries. McLean's spoon skidded through it and threw the ball out softly again and again. A young professional named Horton Smith, the man they called the Joplin Ghost, began carrying the strange spoon. In 1930, at Savannah, Smith beat Bobby Jones in the last competitive season Jones ever played, the final man to ever defeat him. Then Smith handed his rival a gift, one of McLean's concave wedges. Jones took it to Hoylake for the Open Championship. In the final round, with the Grand Slam hanging by a thread, he reached for the cotton farmer spoon and saved the stroke he needed. 4 national championships in 1 summer. The concave wedge had touched the most sacred scorecard in the game. In 1931, the USGA banned concavity itself. The club that helped complete the Grand Slam was illegal the following season. No player was punished. No title was returned. The rule makers simply erased the club and kept the history it had written. But the warning reached every workbench in America. Invent something that matters, and a committee will vote on whether it deserves to exist. McLean went back to Texas and his cotton, and a professional named Gene Sarazen studied the corpse. He flattened the face, kept the flange, and built the modern sand wedge from what the band left behind. Every bunker shot you have ever hit descends from an outlawed club. And the committees had noticed something else about the modern golfer. If they could not trust what he carried, they could at least count it. The next band is in your bag every Saturday morning. By the middle of the 1930s, steel had done something unexpected. Players who missed the feel of hickory stopped choosing between clubs and simply carried everything. At the United States Open of 1935, the average bag held 18 clubs. One competitor arrived with 32, a full right-handed set, and a full left-handed set in case his ball came to rest against a tree. Lawson Little won the American and British amateurs back-to-back, hauling as many as 30 clubs. His caddy hauled the consequences, but the bags kept growing, and the rule makers reached for their pens. This time, they had a case. Caddies were being broken under the weight, and the committees argued that a champion should be tested on skill, not inventory. A Scot named Robert Harris proposed a limit of 14. His first attempt failed. The idea found its footing at the Walker Cup of 1936. There, the story goes, Bobby Jones compared bags with his friend Tony Torrance. Jones had carried 16 clubs to his Grand Slam. Torrance had carried 12. 14 sat exactly between 2 friends. Harris himself later admitted the number passed without the why and wherefore ever being debated. Nobody knows why 14. There is no science under the floorboards. The rule took effect in America on January the 1st, 1938. Every golfer alive obeys a number that 2 men may have settled in a clubhouse conversation. You have counted to 14 your whole golfing life. Nobody ever told you whose fault it was. Counting clubs, though, was housekeeping. The rule makers had not yet banned a human being. That was coming. Now you know where this story was always heading. Go back to Firestone and watch what golf did to Sam Snead next. The croquet stroke was not a stunt. Both eyes faced the hole instead of peeking sideways at it. The blade ran straight down the line, and the yips went silent. Ordinary golfers had quietly putted this way for decades wherever shaking hands needed help. Snead simply carried their secret onto national television and made it win. The better it worked, the more uncomfortable powerful men became. But Augusta was watching, and Augusta belonged in spirit to Bobby Jones. The man whose wedge the rule makers had seized in 1931 now hated everything about Snead's cure. The story handed down says Jones took his complaint straight to Joseph Day, executive director of the USGA. The victim of one ban had become the author of the next. The wheels turned with astonishing speed. Within weeks of that Masters, both ruling bodies agreed on new language. No stroke may be made from astride the line of the putt. The date was January the 1st, 1968. Day confessed the decision was made with great reluctance. Then he explained it in words golf never forgot, comparing the stroke to croquet, to shuffleboard, even to a posture of prayer. Not one word of it was about scoring. The stroke was outlawed for how it looked. They banned the cure and left the disease, so Snead stepped his feet to the side of the line, kept everything else, and called it side saddle. At 62, putting sideways, he finished third at the PGA Championship against men half his age. They took his stroke, they never took his answer. The next inventors had no fame to fight back with, they had a golf ball. It never stood a chance. Now we come to the only chapter with a grave in it. In the early 1970s, two scientists named Daniel Napella and Fred Holmstrom went looking for the slice. They were not golf men, they were researchers who saw a physics problem where everyone else saw a moral failing. The slice, they realized, was spin, and spin could be argued with. They cut normal dimples in 6 rows around the ball's equator and made the polar dimples shallow. The asymmetry let the ball adjust its own spin axis in flight, aimed the seam down the fairway, and the ball fought its way back toward straight. They called it Polara. The patent was filed in 1972, production began 3 years later, and when sales opened in 1977, America answered. Ordinary golfers bought hundreds of thousands through small advertisements in the backs of magazines. The slicers, the ones golf had quietly humiliated for a century, finally held a ball that forgave them. The USGA tested it and reached a remarkable conclusion. The ball worked exactly as promised. For precisely that reason, it could not be approved, because it would reduce the skill required to play golf. Inside that ruling sits a real question. If your equipment corrects your mistakes, is the game still a test? It is the most honest question the rule makers ever asked. Their answer was not a debate, it was a burial. In 1978, Napella and Holmstrom sued, charging that the association had conspired with the established ballmakers to strangle a competitor. While the case crawled through the courts, the USGA rewrote the rules of the sport itself. In 1981, it inserted the symmetry rule, requiring every ball to behave identically in flight. The new rule outlawed exactly one product on Earth. The rule did not mention the company by name. It did not need to. The company would not live to see its day in court. The publicity war accomplished what the lawyers could not, and Polara Enterprises collapsed before the appeal was ever argued. Then in 1985, with the appeal about to be heard, the USGA settled. It paid $1,400,000. The condition of the payment was that the ball be removed from the market. Sit with that arrangement for a moment. The governing body of golf did not buy the technology to use it, it paid to bury it. In the settlement papers, there is no gloating and no regret, only lawyers tidying a grave. The association never admitted wrongdoing, and it never had to. Winning by exhaustion looks exactly like winning. Two scientists solved the most common misery in the sport, and their reward was a check and a shovel. The slicers went back to slicing. The symmetry rule is still printed in the rule book today, a law that outlived the company it was written against. Every other club in this story was merely banned. Polara was destroyed. The next company they came for refused to die. You already know its name. By the late 1980s, the USGA had grown alarmed by a new kind of groove. Square grooves cut into irons by a stubborn Norwegian-born engineer named Karsten Solheim gripped the ball harder from bad lies. The association feared they made recklessness free, that a wild drive into the rough should cost something. Karsten believed his club simply made the game kinder to ordinary players, and he had the numbers to prove it. The Ping I-2 was the most popular iron in the world. Karsten had built his company out of a home garage, an engineer who trusted measurements over tradition. Tour players and weekend hackers loved the result in equal measure. In 1990, the rule makers moved against his grooves. Karsten did what no club maker had ever dared. He sued them, colossally, and golf braced for a trial with its own government in the dock. The fight threatened ruin on both sides before the lawyers found an exit. We told that whole war in our video on Ping. What matters tonight is how the piece was written. To end the fight, the lawyers agreed that every Ping Ai 2 made before April of 1990 would be legal forever, grandfathered, untouchable. Both sides called it peace. It was a ceasefire with a fuse in it. Golf filed the clause away and forgot it. For 20 years, it sat in a drawer like a loaded gun. Nobody planned to reach for it. Nobody ever does. Before the gun went off, the war found the most beloved man in golf, and it wounded him in a way no lawsuit ever could. At the turn of the millennium, Callaway built a driver whose face flexed beyond what American rules allowed. The flex worked like a trampoline, throwing the ball forward with borrowed energy. The company named it the ERC2, for the initials of its founder, Eli Reeves Callaway. The USGA declared it illegal. The association had drawn a line on springiness itself, and Callaway had built deliberately past it. Here the two old empires split again, just as they had over the workshop Putter 9 decades earlier. The royal and ancient, ruling everywhere outside America, examined the same driver and permitted it. One rulebook blessed the club, the rival rulebook condemned it, and the identical driver was legal in Scotland and contraband in Ohio. Into that fight walked Arnold Palmer, carrying a fresh grief. His own equipment company had just died. The firm traced back to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where a tour brand called First Flight was born in the age of persimmon. It had carried Palmer's name through decades of mergers and a rescue by his friend Jack Lupton, the Coca-Cola bottling magnate. In 1999, Palmer and Lupton faced the arithmetic every small American club maker eventually faced, and chose liquidation. The king buried his own brand. 1 year later, he signed with Eli Callaway, the final equipment deal of his life, and it handed him a grenade. Palmer endorsed the outlaw driver for recreational play, for the ordinary golfer who just wanted the ball to fly. The reaction stunned him. Newspapers and purists accused the greatest ambassador the game ever had of endorsing cheating. His longtime aide, Doc Giffen, watched the noise and the hurt pile up around a man in mourning. But the timing could not have been crueler, and Palmer refused to apologize for any of it. Before you judge him, pause this video and walk out to your garage. Somewhere behind the paint cans is something this story has already named. Maybe a long putter, maybe a sleeve of outlaw balls somebody gave you as a joke, which you quietly kept. We made this video because you kept them. You have been part of this war the whole time. Palmer's defense never wavered. Golf was supposed to be fun, he argued, and the people it was least fun for deserved help. His own company had died trying to serve exactly those golfers. For saying it out loud, the king spent a season being treated like an accomplice. History has quietly ruled in his favor. The gun in the drawer had no such patience. In 2010, the drawer opened. The USGA rolled out a new groove rule, shrinking the sharp, square grooves the professional tour had grown addicted to. This ban reached backward through time, outlawing clubs the players already owned. Retroactive law had arrived in golf, but one club remained untouchable. The Peace Treaty of 1990 still stood, and the old Ping Ai 2 stayed legal by the force of a settled lawsuit. At the season's first full event in Hawaii, John Daly and Dean Wilson walked out carrying wedges from the 1980s. Weeks later, Phil Mickelson joined them at Torrey Pines. A tour veteran named Scott McCarron told a reporter it was cheating and said he was appalled Phil had put it in play. Mickelson answered that every club in his bag was approved and hinted at lawyers of his own. For one strange month, the biggest stars in golf fought a public war over 20-year-old irons. The man who ended it was not a rulemaker. John Solheim, Karsten's son, now ran Ping, and he voluntarily waived the rights his father had won in court. The loophole closed, and the commissioner, Tim Fincham, praised him for it. Consider what actually happened there. The governing body had written a rule it could not enforce. The family it once tried to crush had to rescue it from its own paperwork. The son ended the war, the father won 20 years after the shooting stopped. Every fight so far belonged to champions and companies. The next one arrived at your course. For decades, golfers whose nerves had betrayed them found refuge in the long putter, anchored against the chest or the belly. It was no fringe cure. In a 3-season stretch, Keegan Bradley, Webb Simpson, Ernie Els, and Adam Scott all won majors with anchored strokes. 4 of 6 major championships had fallen to the anchor, and the rule makers panicked. Yet no population anchored more than retired golfers. the men and women whose hands had earned a little shake. The rule makers argued, and it was not absurd. A stroke, they said, should be a swing, and a club pinned against the body is something else. Reasonable people believe that. The proposal came at the end of 2012, and thousands of written protests poured in, more resistance than any equipment ruling had ever drawn. But the protests changed nothing. In May of 2013, USGA President Glenn Nager and the Royal and Ancients Peter Dawson confirmed the ban. The free swing of the club, they declared, must be protected. The putters themselves stayed legal. The comfort they offered became a penalty. No compensation was offered, and no exception was made for age or affliction. The oldest golfers in the game simply lost their cure. It began, as always, on January the 1st, and the year was 2016. Sam Snead had been dead for over a decade, and golf had learned nothing from him. Once again, they banned a cure and left the disease. This time, the disease belonged to millions of weekend golfers with honest, shaking hands. Tell us in the comments which club from this story is still in your bag, and whether you still anchor that putter on Saturday mornings. We suspect the confessions will outnumber the apologies, and we are on your side. Because here is the ending they would rather not have narrated. The war has never once stopped. In December of 2023, the two governing bodies announced the boldest confiscation yet. Not a putter this time, not a stroke. The ball itself. Every golf ball in the world rolled back to fly shorter, with the rules beginning to bite before this decade ends. The distance you spent a lifetime earning has been ruled excessive. To be fair to the men in blazers, they are not wrong about the problem. The ball flies farther every decade, old courses are running out of land, and something someday may truly have to give. They are simply certain that they alone should choose the answer. Not what golf is. Who decides? Listen to who is angriest. Keegan Bradley, the man whose putting stroke they outlawed a decade ago, has heard the knock before. He called the rollback a punishment of golfers for the rule makers' own mistakes. One of the dumbest things he had ever heard. The victim of the last ban is the loudest witness against the next one. Arthur Knight could have warned him. So could Sam Snead and two scientists in a courtroom they never reached. But the pattern has a second half. Bans are written by committees, and committees age. The center-shafted putter came back. Steel conquered. What golf loves finds its way back into the bag, with or without permission. Tomorrow, an hour before sunrise, on a public course outside Dayton, Ohio, a retired machinist will stand alone on the first tee. He will check over his shoulder and reach past the ball pocket into the hidden one. He will tee up a ball with strange, shallow dimples and a printed arrow. He will aim the arrow and swing. The ball will start right the way his ball has started right for 60 years. Then it will straighten itself in the air like a lie correcting itself into the truth. He is cheating no one. There is no trophy in his trunk, no purse, no title on the line. There is only an old man playing a ball two scientists were paid to make disappear, invented for exactly his hands. The steel shaft beat them once. That means the next fight is not settled either. When they come for the ball you play, at least you will recognize the knock.